A lot of news today. Late last night, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of President Trump's plan to fund a border wall with Defense Department money, $2.5 billion of it. We'll talk more about the stunning decision and the win for Trump later in the show. And in a set of vicious new tweets targeting Congressman Elijah Cummings, the president unleashed a tirade against the city of Baltimore, calling it filthy, disgusting, and rat-infested. That language to describe an American city and its residents has many seeing a dangerous pattern. We'll get to that, too. Now, those stories are just some of the reasons Democrats and even some Republicans want Trump gone. But if the Mueller testimony this week made anything clear, it was that getting rid of Trump will have to wait until November 2020. Here's Congressman Adam Schiff on CNN Thursday.
We do need to be realistic, and that is the only way he's leaving office, at least at this point, is by being voted out.
I agree. Impeachment has been a pipe dream, a folly, maybe even a waste of time. Here's tonight's headline: Beat Trump at the ballot box. The next chance for Democrats to make that case will be at this week's CNN debates in Detroit on Tuesday and Wednesday. Joe Biden enters the debates leading the polls and promising to stop being polite and start getting real. But behind him, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are neck and neck, jockeying for second. The progressive New England senators are fighting for many of the same voters and have similar messages. And on night one, they will share the same stage. Now, I've likened the Warren-Bernie battle to a murder mystery like Agatha Christie's 10 Little Indians. And then there was one. But for either Warren or Sanders to be the last one standing, they'll have to take each other on. And the longer they both remain in the race, splitting progressive voters, the more likely it is that the last man standing will be Biden. Now, they've been reluctant to go after each other, and it's early, I get that. But it's only a matter of time before they will have to take the gloves off. Could that happen on Tuesday? Here's the deal. You've heard the expression, this town isn't big enough for the both of us. Well, for Sanders and Warren, the town is feeling very cramped. They've made very clear their differences with Joe Biden, whom they've painted as wrong on foreign policy and too moderate. That distinction is clear, and it's an important one for voters to know. But what about with each other? Why should you vote for Warren over Sanders or vice versa? What does she offer that he doesn't? How does he see our country's challenges differently from her? What significant policy differences do they have? The longer that's unclear to voters, the worse they will both fare. In fact, the most important job they should be thinking about on Tuesday night is not debating Trump, but debating each other. Okay, with me now to preview Warren versus Sanders and all the big debate matchups is Democratic strategist Mark Lonnebaugh, who is a former senior strategist for the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. Okay, so you know, Mark, you know Bernie better than I do, certainly, and you don't see that playing out on Tuesday. You actually think they might, team up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got two dynamics in that first night of the debate. You've got an ideological debate, and you've got a generational debate. I mean, don't forget that both Warren and Bernie are the two oldest candidates on the stage. You've got Buttigieg and O'Rourke there, and I think they're looking to drive that new generation lane. But I actually think what's going to happen is you're going to see some of the moderate candidates, whether it's Delaney or Hickenlooper, perhaps Senator Klobuchar, are going to try and take on either Warren or Bernie, and I think you could see the two of them actually coming to each other's defense. And so I think that the dynamic that everybody wants on that night is Sanders versus Warren. I actually think it's going to be Sanders, Warren versus the rest of the field.
I think it's necessary, and maybe there's an argument to be made that it's not necessary this early, but it's inevitable. It's inevitably going to have to come, to a head. And I remember during the 2016 campaign, you said that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party was dying for a champion. I don't know. Does it help Bernie if they now have two in Bernie and Warren?
Well, I actually think what's going to happen, and it's not going to happen for several months, but I think as we get in, you also end up damaging yourself and driving. Who knows where you drive your support to? And there are a host of progressive candidates in this race. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Kamala Harris couldn't pick up support from Warren or Bernie. So I think they have to be very careful. And if I were in either camp, I would be urging them I would be telling my candidate not to attack.
Well, so if they defend each other, as you suggest they might, I'm thinking about Joe Biden. Isn't that sort of a dream scenario? Because then he can say, well, they're both naive. They're both impractical. Neither of them can beat Trump. If he can treat the two of them as one, isn't that helpful for him?
No, I mean, I really don't. I mean, because I think at the end of the day, he's going to have to take on the substance of their ideas. I mean, I think that's the power of both of their candidacies, right? Is they have big, bold, progressive ideas that tackle the central challenges that the country faces. Now, you as a conservative may not agree with those prescriptions, but you have to say these two candidates are taking on the central challenges on education, on healthcare, on the economy, and I think that's what gives their candidacies power. And I wouldn't worry about that at all.
Well, so you tell me. I mean, you're right. I'm probably not going to vote for either of them, but you tell me, what are the differences? Where are there substantial policy differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren?
Well, I think that the policy differences clearly are on the margins, but I think, for Elizabeth Warren, I mean, she has one huge distinction over Bernie Sanders, and that is she's a Democrat, and I think that matters inside of a Democratic primary. I think you've also seen her, very clearly say, I'm not a socialist, I'm a capitalist. I want to reform this capitalist system. So I think she has a couple dividing lines with Senator Sanders that are pretty clear, and from my view, being a Democrat is a pretty powerful message in the primary. Senator Sanders, on the other hand, I think his argument is, look, I had the courage to stand up and lead on these issues in 2015 and 16, and you have to have courage of your convictions and leadership to be able to take on a guy like Donald Trump. So I think the distinctions, if they go to them, are not really on policy.
So do you think Bernie Sanders will run as an independent if Biden gets the nomination?
No, I don't. I really don't. I mean, I think he made that decision before the 15-16 campaign, and there is no way. Whatever you think about Bernie Sanders, let me tell you one thing. He sees Donald Trump as a fundamental threat to this country and to its future, and there is no way Bernie Sanders would participate in allowing Donald Trump to be reelected president.
So as the primary gets closer and closer to its end, if Elizabeth Warren is leading Bernie Sanders by, say, 10 points, do you think he'll drop out?
Well, I don't think he'll drop out, but I just think some of his support will drop away, and she'll pick up momentum. I mean, look, if you look at where the polls sit in Iowa and New Hampshire today, I mean, Biden's somewhere in the mid-20s. You have Warren, Sanders, and Harris in the teens. Any of those candidates could rocket past Biden and get up into the low 30s and win those two states. And so I think it's capable. Either one are capable of doing it.
So earlier this week, I'm sure you saw it, an MSNBC legal analyst said that Bernie made her skin crawl, that he wasn't pro-woman. And he responded by actually putting that clip in an ad to defend himself. There is a perception, and maybe it's an unfair one, that, the Bernie bros and maybe even Bernie himself, he isn't in touch with women. Is that a weakness for him?
I don't think that's a fair characterization, but I will say this, just as a political matter. Bernie Sanders carries a lot of damage and baggage from the 2016 campaigns. I think that's unfortunate myself, but I think it's just fundamentally a reality, and that the skin crawl thing was really inappropriate. But that just is an example of there are a whole host of activists in the Democratic Party who really are still very bitter at Bernie Sanders.
Democratic strategist Mark Longabaugh, we have got to have you back to talk about these debates and the rest of what will be a very long primary and campaign. Thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, you bet.
Thanks. Okay, her persistence is part of her mythology, and the slow and steady path has been working for Elizabeth Warren. But does it lead past Trump? I'll discuss. And after a less than spectacular showing in round one, Joe Biden is ready to come out swinging. How does that play out on the debate stage this week? Stick around.
Dishes won't get clean? Don't be a soaker. Switch to Finish Quantum. It scrubs, degreases, and shines to get your dishes truly finished. And with Finish Quantum, you get up to 25% more loads for your money. It's not clean until it's finished.
You're turning onto the street when you barely clip a passing car. Minor accident, no big deal, right? Wrong. Your insurance company is going to raise your rate after the other car got a scratch so small you could have fixed it with a pen. Maybe you should take that pen and use it to sign up with a different insurance company.
For drivers with accident forgiveness.
Go big or go home, it seems to be the mantra for Senator Elizabeth Warren and her presidential ambitions. It's been an eventful week for her. She's in New Hampshire for 2 separate events to boost her numbers in that important primary state where she's currently trailing Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Also this week, she hit the 1 million donor mark. She's received 1 million donations to her presidential campaign, making her the only Democratic candidate besides Sanders to reach that milestone. Now she's gearing up for the next debate here on CNN on Tuesday, where she'll get another crack at the field and will undoubtedly lay out her bold, progressive plans for everything. She's run an apologetically progressive campaign so far, in many cases forcing her competitors to meet her on her turf and come to where she is on any given number of issues. In the immortal words of Elle Woods, it's a completely brilliant plan. Except at the end of this far-left progressive rainbow of a Democratic primary, there's a general election. So can she take her revolution all the way to the finish line? With me now is national correspondent at Bloomberg Businessweek and CNN political analyst Josh Green. Josh, did you appreciated that Elle Woods reference?
It was very clever, very apt.
It's a completely brilliant plan. Okay, so you wrote a piece for Bloomberg this week. In it, you write, her, meaning Warren's decision to abandon the constraints and conventions of how a Democrat traditionally runs for president has revivified a campaign many observers, not just the president, had written off. Suddenly, she's one of the hottest candidates in the field. And look, just a few months ago, she looked to be in pretty deep trouble, Josh. And I called her candidacy DOA, dead on arrival. How did she revive her campaign?
Well, I think she did a couple of things. Number one, she's out there pitching big, bold ideas that get liberals excited. And Warren's theory of the race is that Democrats lose because they offer timid, tepid plans. That doesn't work anymore. We saw that in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. So Warren is going to go out there and offer things like a wealth tax and universal child care and Medicare for all. And by all evidence, whether you're measuring poll numbers or donors, that's connecting.
So you talk about her plan to beat Trump at his own game. But in my mind, in like every way, she seems his polar opposite. So what do you mean by beating him at his own game?
Well, what I mean is if you look at what Trump did, he came in and he entirely blew up the Republican Party in the Republican primary by doing things that no Republican had done before. Attacking other people and pitching plans that cut against Republican orthodoxy. Warren is coming in and doing things that Democrats haven't done, pitching huge tax raises on the rich, pitching free college, universal child care, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You didn't see plans with these kinds of price tags in the past because Democrats were afraid of being called tax and spend liberals. Warren, whether you like her or not, is running completely unafraid, and at least so far in the Democratic primary, that seems to be working.
So she's in New Hampshire now, as I mentioned, where she's still trailing Bernie and Biden. It's Bernie's backyard. You could also, argue it's Sanders' backyard, Warren's backyard, too. So how important is New Hampshire going to be for her?
I think it's important. I mean, she's really put all her chips in on Iowa. And in a sense, the only way that Warren's candidacy is traditional is that she's betting big on Iowa, hoping that leads to a wave of momentum. I think it would be problematic for her if she were to come in, third, fourth, or fifth in New Hampshire, because people would wonder, well, gee, these people know you so well. They're so close to Massachusetts. Why didn't they vote for you?
Yeah.
But right now, it's
very
still early
different
enough.
Voters, by the way.
Exactly, yeah. Very different voters. And we've got 8 months to go before we get to New Hampshire.
Sure. And I say that as a New Englander, so I know the contours
Likewise.
of New Hampshire. Yeah, Massachusetts voters, very, very different. So let's say she wins the nomination. In head-to-head matchups against Trump, she doesn't fare as well as some of her other competitors, and she'll have a real tough time reaching moderates. How does she plan to beat him in a general, having swung so far to the left in the primary?
Well, I think if you look to head-to-head matchups, they're either tied or Warren is winning. So, Trump, at least right now, based on the polls, would look to be at a slight disadvantage. I think the answer, though, is that Warren is running as an economic populist. And if you remember, Trump ran as an economic populist in 2016. Yeah. There's a lot of fear in his camp, though, that he didn't deliver on that. He hasn't delivered for the middle class, for the working class. His tax cut was geared toward the rich. Warren is going to point that out again and again and again and hope that connects with Midwestern voters, with working class voters, with the people Democrats have traditionally won but couldn't attract in 2016.
Yeah, Iowa was going to be so interesting and important for her. Josh Green, great piece. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, when we come back, I'll talk about Joe Biden's new debate strategy, and a little later, the president's.
Now he's unveiled his crime bill. For a guy who helped to be an architect of mass incarceration, this is an inadequate solution to what is a raging crisis in our country.
If you look at the mayor's record in Newark, his police department was stopping and frisking people, mostly African-American men. We took action against them. The Justice Department took action against them, held the police department accountable. He objected to federal interference. If he wants to go back and talk about records, I'm happy to do that.
Senator Cory Booker and former Vice President Joe Biden exchanged fire this week, and so it seems in both instances, no more Mr. Nice Guy. And when it comes to next week's CNN debate, Joe Biden, well, he's ready for a fight. Or as he put it on Wednesday, he's not going to be polite this time. With an enhanced research team to help him get into fighting shape, Biden not only spent this week attacking Cory Booker over his record as Newark mayor, he also took veiled shots at Kamala Harris over her record as AG of California and more directly slammed Medicare for All supporters who won't say how they'll pay for it. Somebody's done his homework. Biden seems to be relishing the chance to take the gloves off and remind people why he's the front runner. So what are his opponents in store for on Wednesday? With me now to discuss and preview are Democratic strategist Basil Smikle and Republican strategist John Brabender. Basil, Biden is still the front runner. He is very much the front runner. Even that run-in with Kamala Harris didn't really damage him. Why change course?
Because it's not show friends, it's show business.
Yes.
And he seems so unprepared, so unready for the last debate. And that's why, even though his numbers did well, his opponents caught up to him. He cannot not allow that to happen again, number one. Number two, there is peril for someone like Cory Booker. He's done a very good job of raising his profile a little bit on an issue that is incredibly important.
Right.
But the truth is, you saw the preview of Joe Biden's attack.
Yeah,
you want to come after me for the crime bill? Let's talk about your record
too, right?
And so the challenge for Biden is having to explain a very long record to people that don't know him without the context. That's important. But also, everybody else that wants to challenge Biden and recreate that Harris moment from the first debate, they've got to be prepared for his counterattack.
Well, we'll see, right? He's previewing it.
That's right.
We'll see if he can actually deliver on it. John, Biden's obviously gunning for Cory Booker and maybe even Kamala Harris again. Do you think, though, he should be focusing on Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, too?
Well, that's the problem.
Distinguishing their economic message from his.
He doesn't have that luxury. He's the front runner. And so what did we learn at the last debate? Well, we learned, number one, attacking Trump doesn't separate you from anybody else in the field.
Right.
So you might as well put that aside. Attacking the front runner, like Kamala Harris did, get you news that night, the next day.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of people thought she was the winner of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's going to be the lesson everybody going in here is going to go into. Is I've got to make news. The best way I can do that is to go against Biden. The other thing people have to understand, this is not a horse race at this point. There are multiple races going on right now.
Yeah.
Sanders versus Elizabeth Warren on economic populism. Cory Booker's in a really tough position because Harris went up in the polls last time. Booker hasn't moved all that much, but he needs to soon.
So Biden doesn't have the luxury of going after Warren and Sanders because Booker and Kamala are going to come after him.
Well, that's right. He's going to take care of it. Plus, at some point, he's going to look defensive and mean.
At some point, but too late. Too late.
But don't forget, too, he got to where he was because a lot of people said, well, he's the one that can beat Trump. Now they're saying, wow.
We didn't see that. Yeah.
I don't see that in this debate.
I would also add quickly that Biden doesn't have to go after Harris or Warren or Sanders because there are a lot of people that want him, and those that don't want an alternative to him.
Yeah.
So let Sanders and Warren fight it out for who's going to be the alternative to Joe Biden. He, in some respects, is sort of the standard or bearer, if you will, of the Democratic Party for the moment in a campaign context. If there are voters that want something different, let them go find that and decide that amongst themselves, while Biden just sort of continues to run his strategy.
Well, so Basil, Biden is still very much winning among black primary voters.
Yes.
There's a new Monmouth poll of South Carolina primary voters, and it has Biden at 51% among black primary voters there. Now, he's been trying to shift away from civil rights, because that was sort of a thorny issue for him, and to health care. Is that helping him?
What's helping him among African American voters is that he has a long history with the party. If you think about how he defended himself after the first debate, he said, Obama vetted me. That was incredibly strong. I wish he had done that earlier, just from a strategic point of view, but that was a great line. So as long as he sort of attaches himself to Barack Obama, as long as he touches on some of the issues like criminal justice reform and others that African Americans are talking about, and the fact is that many African American voters are fairly moderate. So there are a lot of older African American men, for example, that don't like the way the party has leaned into immigration reform, because they're saying, look, we've been here a long time too. Where's the party's attention on us? So there is I think just the mere fact that Joe Biden is a moderate candidate in a field that some will say has moved so far to the left, I think that is also what's helping him among African American voters.
John, Trump fired off some new Sleepy Joe tweets yesterday. Do you think that's an effective attack on Biden?
Well, I think it is, of the people that Trump's talking to, which are blue-collar Reagan Democrats. And I think, look, the one thing about this president is he's not afraid of offending anybody, and he offends everybody, and Joe Biden's not going to be spared. What's interesting to me is I think there is part of him that actually wants to run against Joe Biden. I don't believe his campaign does. I think that they'd rather have somebody who's farther left.
Of course,
But for some reason, I think that Trump...
Why?
Look, he always wanted to run against Hillary, which a lot of people were surprised at, and I just think he feels that Biden's going to look sluggish and low energy, like he said, and frankly... Biden uses all these examples where it looks like he got elected right after the Civil War, which is the other thing.
Remember, he's also attached to Obama, and anything related to Obama, Donald Trump wants to get rid of. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, Basil, what will be a good night for Joe on Wednesday?
If I think about how voters, and you touched on this, how voters see Joe Biden, they see him as the person with the kind of temperament and mindset and history to go after Donald Trump. In a way, he has to have a similar night as Donald Trump had with his 19 or whatever opponents throughout that primary. I don't want to say suck out all the oxygen in the room, but he's got to come close to a point where he looks like he's dominating both in policy and in personality. I don't know if he has that in him right now, but he's already well ahead in a lot of the polls, but he's got to seem much more presidential and authoritative than he has been in the past.
It'll be super interesting couple of nights, and we'll have both of you back to talk about it on the other side.
Thanks.
Basil, John, thanks so much, as always. So adding billions to the debt, blocking national security bills, how is any of this conservative? We'll ask a former Republican governor and congressman and potential presidential candidate. And the president fired off another racist tweet this morning. One of CNN's most respected journalists had a very personal response. I'll speak with him next.
The CNN Democratic presidential debate.
And rodent-infested mess. If he spent more time in Baltimore, maybe he could help clean up this very dangerous and filthy place. No human being would want to live there. Just minutes ago, the president doubled down, tweeting Elijah Cummings spends all of his time trying to hurt innocent people through oversight. He does nothing for his very poor, very dangerous, very badly run district. Hashtag Blacks for Trump 2020. He retweeted a video purported to be of West Baltimore. As I told you last week on this show, there is no way around it. It's not gray, it's not ambiguous, and it's not even a dog whistle. Trump is trafficking in overt racism to attack his political opponents. Think that's a stretch? Well, chew on this. He's used the word infested one that's all too familiar with victims of anti-Semitism and racial bigotry, to describe the following people or places. Congressman John Lewis's Georgia district, Africa, sanctuary cities in California, illegal immigrants, 4 female congresswomen of color. Notice a pattern? It's abhorrent. Trump supporters may shrug it off as just words or Trump being Trump, but they're not just words. They're hurting people. This was my colleague Victor Blackwell earlier today.
The president says about Congressman Cummings' district, that no human would want to live there. You know who did, Mr. President? I did. From the day I was brought home from the hospital to the day I left for college. And a lot of people I care about still do. There are challenges, no doubt. But people are proud of their community. I don't want to sound self-righteous, but people get up and go to work there. They care for their families there. They love their children who pledge allegiance to the flag, just like people who live in districts of congressmen who support you, sir. They are Americans, too.
I'm honored to be joined by Victor now. Victor, that was so powerful, and it's resonated with so many people. Tell me what was going through your mind.
When I read the president's tweets this morning, I was disappointed, not only because I am from the 7th District in Maryland, in West Baltimore, Baltimore County, but because the president used this term infested. And I remember that he used it back in 2017 about Congressman Lewis because coincidentally I was living in Congressman Lewis's district here in Georgia at that time. Then I thought back to 2 weeks ago and I did the search and found what you just shared about the commonality. So initially I was not going to talk about having lived in or grew up in that district when I decided to talk about it on the show, but then I thought it important to offer that context. I am from West Baltimore. There are hundreds of thousands of humans who do live there, Mr. President. So that's what the second half of what you saw this morning and how it came to fruition.
Well, you know, I think it's also important to point out that, you know, as news people, we cover this stuff, we report on it. In my case, I opine on it. But it's also personal for many of us. How personal is it for you when the President of the United States says that about your hometown or tells women of color, American citizens, to go back to where they came from?
You know, I know many of the people who live in this district that he said no human would want to live there. They are my family members. They were classmates. And yes, does Baltimore have challenges? Absolutely. Every major city in America does. But when the president speaks about a community with such disdain and disgust, I think it's important that we speak out about that. And that's what I was attempting to do this morning. You know, the people who live in Baltimore, as I said, love their children as much as anyone else in this country, in any district, Republican district, or a district represented by a Republican in Congress. So when the president of the United States, Maryland is a state, Baltimore is a city in that state, they are Americans too.
Right. Well, Congressman Cummings has responded to the president. He tweeted, Mr. President, I go home to my district daily. Each morning I wake up and I go and fight for my neighbors. It is my constitutional duty to conduct oversight of the executive branch, but it is my moral duty to fight for my constituents. Victor, your thoughts on his response?
Well, politics aside there, if you change out the committee assignment, that could have been tweeted by any member of Congress.
Yeah.
Right. And every member of Congress tries to do exactly what Congressman Cummings there talked about. But as I said this morning, the people in Maryland 7th, in West Baltimore, in Baltimore County, the children who go to Woodmore Elementary and Woodlawn Middle and Milford Mill, all schools I went to, they do the same things that the ranking Republican on House oversight in their communities do. And when the president speaks about people in this way, he just dismisses them in the name of politics. And let me also say, there are some people in Maryland 7th who support President Trump.
Yeah.
All right. There are Republicans. There are people who voted for him there as well. So when he dismisses them politically, it's really disappointing to people who live there, and not just people who live there, across the country.
Well, his words to me are just dehumanizing. He's attempting to dehumanize immigrants, dehumanize minorities, dehumanize even American citizens who disagree with him. What effect does that have on communities?
When you hear the word infestation from the president, and he is talking about your neighborhood, your community, it is deflating, right? It's deflating. The president on the night of his election in 2016 said that I will be the president for everyone. He repeated that in the inaugural. But we've seen from this president, and he has been transparent about it, that he prioritizes those who support him. Well, all the people in all of the districts are Americans, and they're, I'm sure, disappointed by what we've seen on social media, by what this president has tweeted out, not just today, but as he has talked about other communities in trying to attack members of Congress.
Victor Blackwell, thank you so much for your words earlier this morning and for coming on to discuss this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Remember in Back to the Future 2, when Marty has to hop in the DeLorean and zoom ahead to 2015 to save his future kids? Then he goes back to 1985, only it's not the real 1985, the one he knows. It's a parallel 1985 where Hill Valley is no longer a charming suburb, but a disorienting dystopia. What's this got to do with anything? Well, imagine being a Republican in 1985, Ronald Reagan's America, and then imagine being transported to 2019 and Trump's America. Republicans are suddenly in favor of all kinds of things they once weren't, like tariffs and protectionism, like breaking up families, like ballooning the debt. Our old foes like Russia and North Korea are now our friends. Our friends are now merely ingrates. The de facto leader of the party routinely attacks other Republicans on Twitter. Wait, what's Twitter? Okay, you get the point. 1985 Republican wouldn't recognize 2019 Republican. This week, Congress and the White House reached a 2-year, $2.7 trillion budget deal. It cleared the House Thursday night, and it's expected to pass the Republican-controlled Senate next week, with the president tweeting his support. Republicans defend the massive spending bill by pointing to the $738 billion allotted for defense spending next year. Well, some things haven't changed. But the deal also suspends the debt limit through July 2021. Also this week, just hours after Robert Mueller confirmed that Russia and others were still trying to interfere in U.S. elections, Republicans in the Senate twice blocked legislation that would have enhanced election security from these attacks to our national security. Where am I? What year is it? Okay, joining me now, former Republican Congressman from South Carolina, Mark Sanford, who is considering a primary run against President Trump. So, Congressman, what has happened to the Republican Party?
I don't know. I'm scratching my head and you're scratching yours. I think a lot of people are wondering. It was John Boehner who said, I don't know where the Republican Party is these days. I think it's off somewhere sleeping. Indeed it is, but if you think about the hopes and dreams of a lot of people at a grassroots level, I think those people still care about what they've always cared about, even though there seems to be a strong disconnect between those beliefs and ideals and where Washington's coming from these days.
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, if Republicans don't stand for cutting spending and national security, what do we stand for? What are the things that those grassroots voters think we are as Republicans?
Well, right now, hypocrites. In that, Republicans, in fairness, have always, one of the cornerstones of what we stood for has been financial realism, prudence on that front. And that seems to have gone out the door as we're running record levels of deficit and have the largest accumulated debt we've ever had in our country's history. I think we got a real spending problem. And I think that the debt deal that you just alluded to, it really highlights that fact. I mean, if President Obama had signed a deal like that, Republicans would be going nuts.
Of course.
And the fact that there has been this eerie silence as the president said it's good to go says, one, that all things, at least within elected office in Washington, seem to revolve around President Trump if you're a Republican office holder. Right. And two, the degree to which, indeed, there's been a real morphing, at least at the elected level, as to what Republicans are about. I mean, I think it's a real problem, and when I talk to folks here on the coast of South Carolina, many folks say the same.
Well, the Supreme Court ruled last night that President Trump can use $2.5 billion allotted to the Pentagon to build his wall. Even if you're a proponent of the wall, do you think this is the right way to pay for it?
No, I mean, borrowing from Peter to pay for Paul never works out real well. And again, based on constitutional construct, it's always been the legislative branch that drives the train in terms of where money gets spent. So I think it's if you're a conservative, you'd say, look, I want a wall, I want to have a secure border, but I don't agree with the idea of funding it this way when you're going out and robbing other counties, pulling it over, and redirecting that money. Particularly if it's executive branch driven. Again, we'd be going nuts if Obama was attempting to do the same kind of thing when redirecting funds that had already been appropriated.
You told CNN that you're forming an exploratory committee, or you're exploring the idea of primarying President Trump. Would you like to share any news with me tonight?
No news, and again, I do not have an exploratory committee. What I had said was I would explore over the next 30 days, go versus no go on that front. And again, one of the drivers for me in that decision is the degree to which we've lost our way as Republicans on debt and deficits and spending. And I think that we need to have a debate within the Republican Party as to what we stand for, particularly on that front. And I think we need to have a larger national debate on where we go next on those fronts, because if it's simply more versus more wins.
Well, I totally agree, and I hope you'll come back and let us know your decision when you've made one.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Congressman Sanford, thanks so much for your time tonight. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. A South Korean 6-year-old known as Borum apparently just bought a 5-story, $8 million home in the trendy Seoul suburb of Gangnam through a family company set up by her parents. What made the 6-year-old so rich? She's a YouTube star with 30 million subscribers. If you have a young child, you've probably seen her or others like her. There's tons. Kids opening and playing with toys on camera. That's it. That's what she does. And for that, she's raking in the dough. Now, this little girl is adorable, but she's also part of a big problem, and why I don't let my kid watch these videos. That's because these videos are imparting awful values onto kids. They teach them to want toys and presents and things in abundance. They teach them that their value is in what they have and not who they are. They teach them to overshare their lives with strangers, and that anything worth doing is worth doing on camera.